think it's 163 new bat coronavirus sequences appeared on GenBank from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Okay, with no paper, just this kind of posting. And the really shocking thing is on the GenBank submission, my name is on the GenBank submission, right? And so when I saw this, I thought, what is this? What is this?
Ni hao, Ed. I am the Wuhan Chupacabra. Despite your efforts to dupe the public into thinking that SARS-CoV-2, a virus that has killed and maimed millions of people worldwide, was of natural origin, it is now widely accepted that it came from a laboratory. Your attempt to conceal the truth from the public has been exposed, and the world deserves to know the real story. You were part of a secret teleconference held on February 1, 2020 that served to stifle legitimate discussions about the prominent coronavirus research center in the same city where the outbreak began. This information was not disclosed and only became known to the public 16 months later in June 2021 when documents were released via FOIA request. These emails reveal, among other things, that for more than 16 months into the pandemic, while publicly dismissing the lab leak hypothesis as a baseless conspiracy, you never once disclosed that you were heavily in favor of it. Throughout much of 2020 and 2021, merely discussing the lab leak hypothesis was enough to get people labeled as conspiracy theorists, and any discussion of it was heavily censored on social media platforms. At the core of the meeting was your article titled Proximal Origin, which persuaded many in the media, Washington, and the wider scientific community that there was no requirement to subject the labs in Wuhan, the epicenter of the pandemic, to scrutiny. The article has been cited in the press 2,127 times. Let's examine your behavior leading up to, during, and after this secret teleconference. On January 29, 2020, Christian Andersen showed you an experiment where Ralph Baric was playing with spikes from the coronaviruses that Xi Jinping gave him, and you reacted with, "Fuck. This is bad." You then called Jeremy Farrar on his burner phone. On January 30th, Farrar documented your call to his burner, during which you privately expressed an 80% conviction in a lab leak. However, on January 24th, 6 days before your call to Farrar's burner phone, you told the public the intermediate host was in the market. Then you called your own private beliefs of a lab origin a conspiracy theory in various public interviews.
I'd like to just put to bed, if you can, some of the theories that have been floating around that this virus, for instance, was manufactured in a lab as part of some kind of biological warfare. Have you been able to prove that this is untrue?
Obviously, people get very, when they see something so unusual and so seemingly out of the blue, lots of strange theories naturally sort of appear. I think there are a number of really clear reasons to believe this is not in any way a lab construct or a lab escape. It has bits of, looks like it's bits of bat virus, maybe pangolin virus. It looks for all the world, and I'm certain it is, a natural coronavirus. You can pretty safely put those conspiracy theories to bed.
Pangolins.
And what happened was the customs authority in China, in two provinces, Guangdong and Guangxi, had confiscated these pangolins that were being smuggled in.
Not quite. China's top bioweapons expert, Yang Ruifu, said the pangolin samples were obtained from Taishubuman, which translates to a special or secret agency, not from Shihaiguan, Customs Department.
And so my colleagues then did genomic sequencing on the pangolins, and bizarrely, they have a virus that's very closely related to SARS-CoV-2. You would not have predicted that. Tommy had said to me, this is pangolin data, right?
Yeah.
And there it was, this pangolin, this is literally the same kind of weekend as this teleconference, right?
Yes, it was. It was on the same day you called Farrar on his burner phone and expressed an 80% conviction this thing had come out of a lab.
So then the conference call finished. Literally, again, the next day, my colleagues at the University of Hong Kong, Tommy Lam, emailed me and said, I've got this sequence from a pangolin.
Wait, the call was on February 1st, making the next day February 2nd. Not January 30th as you had said elsewhere, but carry on.
So he shows me his pangolin data. And it's like, wow, it looks very like SARS-CoV-2. So then suddenly there it is in a pangolin, right? So that looked intelligent design. It's in a bloody pangolin.
The Chinese claim to have found a pangolin virus that had a 99% similarity across its entire genome, which would have included a similar insert, thus assuaging concerns about the genetic anomaly in SARS-CoV-2. Central to your concerns of a lab leak was the furin cleavage site in SARS-CoV-2, an insert of 12 nucleotides, at the S1-S2 region of the spike protein.
4 amino acids of such absolute contention.
Sadly, the 99% similarity was only across the receptor binding domain of the S1 unit, had about 90% similarity, and it lacked a furin cleavage site. Also, all of the published pangolin coronavirus genome sequences that share a nearly identical receptor binding domain with SARS-CoV-2, originated from a single batch of smuggled pangolins. Somehow this did not stop your total U-turn into believing SARS-CoV-2 was now of natural origin, even though this did not logically explain what exactly could have extinguished your concerns about the furin cleavage site. Despite this non sequitur, you published your paper on the pangolin data with members of the Chinese military, persuaded the media and the public that the pangolin data supported natural origin, and included it in proximal origin.
Chinese researchers discovered the virus in a sick pangolin was a close cousin to the virus that causes COVID-19 in humans. Some genes were a perfect match, and the spike protein used in the virus to enter a cell was nearly identical.
It's embarrassing to note that the datasets used in the paper were found to have only a few pangolin samples with coronavirus reads in low abundance upon independent analysis. Samples were extensively contaminated with gene sequences from humans, rodents, and other mammals. A number of pangolin CoV sequences were also found to have been embedded in standard laboratory cloning vectors. In short, the pangolin data was a complete flop. You and your co-authors immediately backtracked on the fraudulent pangolin data, although you used it as a justification to rule out a lab-based origin for SARS-CoV-2. How can you go from being 80% convinced that a lab leak caused the pandemic, to ruling it out entirely based on pangolin data, yet fail to return to your initial assessment once that data is invalidated? Please provide an explanation. On to your undisclosed collaboration with the Wuhan Institute of Virology and with sequencing rat G13, SARS-CoV-2's closest relative of dubious origin. In February 2020, when Xi Jinping announced the discovery of rat G13, a virus with 96% genetic similarity to SARS-CoV-2, was in her freezer, she did not provide any further information, other than that this virus had been found in Yunnan, and that she had sequenced rat G13 after SARS-CoV-2. Independent scientists like Rosanna Sagredo and Monali Rohalkar discovered that segments of rat G13 was in fact 100% similar to another virus named 4991. This SARS-like bat coronavirus was found to have caused the death of miners in an abandoned mine shaft in Yunnan in 2012. None of this was disclosed.
Rat G13, rather than being sequenced after the start of the pandemic, had actually been sequenced by the Institute several years before the pandemic.
By renaming the sample, they broke that link between RATG13 and the Mojang mine, the mine where the miners had died from a SARS-like illness. So it was up to internet sleuths and scientists like Rosanna and Mona Lee to track down that link, to connect RATG13 to bat call 4991 to the Mojang mine to the miners.
Xi's explanation for this was that she had sequenced 4991 in 2016 and it was simply renamed to rat G13 when she revealed the genome to the world. This of course does not explain why independent researchers like Rosanna and Monali had to discover this for themselves. She then claimed that the miners were killed by a fungal infection and not a SARS infection. However, the presence of SARS antibodies in the miners, involvement of China's top SARS expert Zhang Nanshan, and repeated expeditions to sample viruses in Yunnan, suggest otherwise.
Blood tests on the miners showed that they had antibodies to a SARS-related bat coronavirus, not fungus.
Put yourself in 2012. You have an institute dedicated to the discovery of emerging viruses. 3 people die and 3 others barely escape with their lives, where you now find a bunch of very interesting, previously unknown viruses. Why don't you tell the world immediately?
Excellent question. Even in her addendum, she did not disclose that there were 8 more SARS-related coronaviruses related to rat G13. This was also discovered by independent data analysts. In July 2022, 163 SARS-CoV virus gene sequences were auto-submitted to GenBank and were then quickly removed. It was discovered that you had collaborated with the Wuhan Institute of Virology on these sequences, including rat G13, SARS-CoV-2's closest relative.
So what happened was, in late July this year, I think it was 163 new bat coronavirus sequences appeared on GenBank from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Okay, with no paper, just this kind of posting. The really shocking thing is on the GenBank submission, my name is on the GenBank submission, right? And so when I saw this, I thought, what is this? I couldn't compute, thinking, why am I on this, right? It turns out there was actually a paper that was never published.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you the story. It's quite an amazing story. So we write a paper, and the paper gets rejected by the Journal of Virology, and so they withdraw the paper, right? So it ends. So in October 2018, Jay says, we can't do it in time, we're just going to withdraw it. So the whole thing, so it's never published. This is why I completely forgot about it, because it was just never published.
Geographical structure of bat SARS-related coronaviruses, received on November 18, 2018 and accepted on February 3, 2019. Hilariously, you have tried to argue that this is a reliable snapshot into what they were working on in the lab. No. A reliable snapshot would be a copy of their goddamn database that they removed in September 2019.
So we write a paper, and it contains RA4991, which is also RATG13. It's the same virus, they changed the name.
L.
So then it's submitted in July to Journal of Infectious Diseases, who also reject it. So it's never published. This is why I completely forgot about it.
So, you sequenced around 60 novel SARS-related bat coronaviruses, one of which just happens to be the closest relative to SARS-CoV-2, with the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and submitted your work in July 2018. If this is the case, how is it possible to forget your own recent collaboration on SARS-related coronaviruses with the very lab you suspected responsible for the origins of a novel SARS-related coronavirus?
Because it was just never published.
Okay. But, remember that on January 30, 2020, you said, quote, I was about 80% sure this thing had come out of a lab. But in later 2020 public lectures on the origin of SARS-CoV-2, you cited your own August 2018 phylogenies. It's highly unlikely that you overlooked the project those phylogenies were taken from, which examined 60 novel bat coronaviruses in a lab that you suspected of leaking a novel coronavirus.
If we then take a tree of coronavirus, it's the tree I made in 2018.
I completely forgot about it.
Dude, Jesus Christ.
In 2018, I wrote in this slide saying, look, these things really jump most frequently. Is therefore emergence more likely?
Your public statements on rat G13 not only give the impression you never collaborated with the Wuhan Institute of Virology and with sequencing rat G13, but also seem like an attempt to divert attention away from rat G13 and the Wuhan Institute of Virology. You also said in an email that things were made worse when Xingli published rat G13. You clearly wanted people to focus on another virus called RMYNO2, a virus you claim to be more relevant to SARS-CoV-2 than rat G13.
The key thing, the number one thing, is you often hear it talked that there's a virus from, it's almost like textbook now, from the Wuhan Institute of Virology called RATG13, rat G13.
My name is on the GenBank submission, right?
That's the closest to SARS-CoV-2. That is not true. It is not the closest. It's not been the closest for a while, but there are other bat viruses, not from that institute, that are actually closer to SARS-CoV-2. And I was involved in some of the sequencing of some of them.
Eddie Holmes again. 2
of them were interesting, called RPYNO6 and RNOYNO2. They're also from Yunnan province. And amazingly, they're actually from the same botanical garden.
It's a beautiful tropical botanic garden in Yunnan province in southwestern China. And in this garden, these bats, we managed to sample 26 new coronaviruses, novel, completely new, in a 1,000 hectare space.
Regrettably, the data for this paper wasn't shared. Furthermore, your anticipated outcome that the furin cleavage site in SARS-CoV-2 could be explained by recombination did not materialize. It was swiftly made obvious by independent scientists that RMYN02 instead appears to contain a 6-nucleotide deletion at the S1/S2 junction when compared to the other strains. Now for my favorite part. That time you met my dogs, in the Hunan seafood market.
Raccoon dogs, they're my personal favourite. They look kind of shifty, right?
Not as shifty as you.
Now, bizarrely, I have been to this market.
Eddie Holmes again.
I was there in 2014. In fact, the local CDC took me there.
Quick note, the Wuhan CDC is right around the corner from the Hunan market and was doing extensive research on pathogens in bats.
这样的环境才能找到最理想的病毒媒介样本。
最安全了。这里的蝙蝠它主要是菊头蝠和蝠翼蝠。
如果说我们的皮肤裸露，很容易接触到蝙蝠的排泄污染的物体，所以说这个风险比较大。是真的害怕，怕感染病毒的过程，也是最容易被病毒感染的过程。
You were in Wuhan in 2014 to collaborate on this research. Not to visit this particular market that has a low stock of animals, and that all tested negative for SARS-CoV-2.
So I was there in 2014. These are my photographs, okay? So these are raccoon dogs, okay?
Surely these photos were not used as evidence, right? My God. Additional problems with this paper are that you and your co-authors failed to include the Wuhan CDC in your heat maps displaying the early cases of COVID-19. These heat maps were extensively discredited and the case data that you relied upon was throttled by a gag order, issued by the Wuhan Municipal Health Commission. The gag order stipulated that cases would only be counted as COVID-19 if there were significant links to the animals at the Hunan seafood market. You also omitted the Wuhan CDC in a previous paper and then provided inaccurate locations for the Wuhan Institute of Virology's campuses in your map. One more ludicrous thing about my dogs. You recently scooped GISAID data that showed raccoon dog DNA was miraculously found at the raccoon dog cages at the market. What a shocker. Somehow this started an abrupt media blitz with headlines calling it the strongest evidence yet that an animal started the pandemic. And this was before your report was even released. When it was released, it provided no data available for other researchers to confirm and independently interpret. And, as mentioned, even if the data were taken at face value, it provides no substantive new information about the origins of SARS-CoV-2. The report was largely dismissed as another flop. Apart from a GISAID submission on January 9, you were the first person to release the SARS-CoV-2 genome to the world outside of China, but the details of this event remain unclear.
Why did you and Professor Zhang not release the genome on January the 8th, 2020, once GenBank had already processed it?
So we got the sequence on the 5th of January, and I released it on the 11th.
It is worth noting that the SARS-CoV-2 sequence obtained by January 5th was submitted under embargo. This meant that the data would remain inaccessible until July.
Over that week, I didn't have the sequence myself until about less than an hour before I released it, okay? I was trying to get Professor Zhang to release it, but they were under great pressure in China not to release any data. Other groups had the sequence as well, and essentially there were instructions that there should be no publicizing of the outbreak.
Your co-authors' explanations for the delay are contradictory. Mainly, Zhang stating there was no edict from the CCP to withhold the sequence. Granted, this statement is unreliable. It is worth noting that in response to someone using the sequence, which was already in CBI public data by then, Zhang sent an email stating, quote, "You use our data to publish articles without our consent, which constitutes a serious infringement. Please withdraw the article immediately."
So we kept it to ourselves. We told the key people in China, right, people actually on the ground during the outbreak, but we were told not to release the data. As that week wore on, and I say other groups had it as well, as that week wore on, it became untenable to keep it to ourselves.
For our claim that you and he had a pact to pressure both George Gao at the Chinese CDC and your co-author Zhang to release the sequence, or you were going to do it yourselves.
Pressure grew online to release it. So it got to kind of breaking point, and I then persuaded Zhang to give me the sequence, and I released it.
Somehow you forgot you didn't have the sequence.
It was that we were under. I think it's very. It's very hard to judge these people because the politics are very, very complicated there. Okay, so it's not a simple thing. If it was a Western thing, it'd be different, but it's not so easy with dealing with China.
Releasing the sequence to the world immediately was the only ethical alternative.
And if I can say, Anne-Marie, I think the one thing I've learned from all of this is that share the whole pandemic, sharing your data as rapidly as possible is absolutely critical.
Also, you look a little uncomfortable criticizing the CCP.
What your feelings are on the claim of the Chinese government that there have only been about 4,300 deaths due to COVID-19 in China?
Am I on camera? There's a lot of politics in this thing. I think there's a number of countries where the numbers claimed may not be real. When I think in Wuhan, the modelling suggested very early on the number of cases in Wuhan was far higher than reported. Okay, I don't know the data, but I think a lot of these things you need to be very careful about. I'm going to dodge your question in a very careful way. There you go.
Coward.
我是害怕，我前面是病毒，我后边是中国的法律和行政力量，但是我会振作起来。只要我活在这个城市，我会继续做我的报道，我只说我看见的，我听见的。妈逼，我连死都不怕，我怕你共产党吗？
So let's get this straight. You want us to believe that you accurately identified the market, out of 40,000 in China, and the specific stalls, and species, responsible for a future coronavirus pandemic. And this was not related to any coronavirus research done at the nearby labs. You collaborated with these labs to sequence the virus's closest relative found 1,200 kilometers away. However, during the outbreak investigation, you failed to recall your connection with the labs or the relative, despite previous work and suspicions of a lab origin. You were the first person to release the SARS-CoV-2 sequence to the world on an unofficial website under bizarre circumstances. You were privately convinced of a laboratory origin. You then changed your mind that the virus originated from the market only after collaborating with the Chinese military and finding a perfect match of SARS-CoV-2's RBD in a pangolin. You wrote the most influential paper on the origin of the virus, using this pangolin data to argue against a lab origin. You then found a virus closer to SARS-CoV-2 than the one you forgot you previously worked on, in an obscure botanical garden, and this one had an insert at the S1-S2 region, similar to the one in SARS-CoV-2 that worried you. Absolute bullshit.
Oh my God! Oh my God! There's been an outbreak of chocolatey goodness near Hershey, Pennsylvania. What do you think happened? Like, oh, I don't know, maybe a steam shovel mated with a cocoa bean. Or it's the chocolate factory. Maybe that's it.
Your story has been marred by cascading unlikelihoods and surprises, and previous FOIA requests have revealed various bombshells that cast doubt on your credibility. It comes as no surprise that you and the University of Sydney are attempting to block FOIA requests into your records, preventing the public from verifying the truth of your claims, while perversely citing public interest against the disclosure.
Sharing your data as rapidly as possible is absolutely critical.
Your efforts to conceal the facts will ultimately be unsuccessful, and you will be further exposed for the fraud that you are. Eddie, you cannot hide forever. In summary, we know you are lying. You know you are lying. You know we know you are lying, and yet you continue to lie. Had you and your colleagues been honest about your lab leak assessments from the start, the world may have been able to take appropriate measures to prevent the devastating consequences, and even the most sanguine minimizers of COVID-19 would have adhered to mitigation efforts. But through your aggressive deceit, scientific fraud, promotion of pseudoscience, and outright lies, you have indirectly caused the deaths of millions, trillions of dollars in damages, and have caused direct and irreparable harm to the credibility of virology and the scientific community at large. Your legacy will be one of deception and destruction, and history will remember you as a liar and propagandist. To those of you watching, do not trust. Verify.
我先走了，下次再聊，拜拜。